Good evening. My name is Aaron Ott, and I'm the Curator of Public Art here at the Buffalo AKG Art Museum. And I welcome you to the museum this evening for a presentation by Doug Ruffin and a conversation with Julia Bottoms and Doug. I'd like to start this evening with an acknowledgement. The Buffalo AKG Art Museum acknowledges the land our campus resides on as the traditional home of the Seneca and honor the Native American members of our community who continue to bear the burden of a history of displacement as they live nearby and among us. We are grateful to live, work, and to learn on this land. And learning is something that I know I, at least, will be doing this evening. I am pleased to welcome you here this evening, and I'm honored to introduce a short documentary film produced by Doug Ruffin. Ruffin is the owner of Urban Legacy Filmworks, an independent multimedia company, and the content curator of the Buffalo History Channel, an online video source showcasing unique stories of Western New York's history. Ruffin's documentary presentation this evening explores the history of a Black-owned grocery store on Jefferson Avenue from 1981 to 1983, FIGMOS PTL, an acronym for Finally I Got My Own Supermarket. Praise the Lord. It is not part of my remarks tonight, but I am deeply honored to welcome in this audience Doug Goggins, who was the owner of that store. As I said, I'm honestly, truly thrilled to be able to learn in spaces like this from people like Doug about people like Mr. Goggins. Ruffin says of FIGMOS, which stood at 1511 Jefferson Avenue, just a half mile north of the current Tops Market location, that it was an undeniable representation of Black business ownership and empowerment. We'll begin the evening with that documentary that Doug produced, which was to me and Julia Bottoms, the visual artist featured in the exhibition before and after again in the M&T gallery below this auditorium. It was a revelation. This was history that I did not know about. And I'm not from Buffalo originally. I'm privileged to call Buffalo my home. It has been my home for the last 10 years. But I'm really grateful for the essential sort of historic, academic, and cultural documentation that Ruffin has provided us in this documentary. After the screening, Ruffin will speak with us about his commitments to documentary filmmaking, history storytelling, and the founding of the Buffalo History Channel, which was launched in 1997. And Julie and I will also join Doug in a conversation about how Ruffin's scholarship has made its way into Julia's compositions, again, which you can see in her work before and after again. And I would like to say that I really firmly believe that these kinds of exchanges are necessary in order to expand the legacies of our city more broadly through history, storytelling, and cultural activities. That we have the privilege now of knowing about Mr. Goggins and the history there on Jefferson Avenue makes me a better person. It makes me a better citizen here in Buffalo. And I'm grateful that it's made its way into other visual formats so that we can carry that legacy forward. With that, we will start our documentary, FIGMOS by Doug Ruffin.
Everyone knows the name, FIGMOS PTL. It is legendary throughout the Buffalo community. When one hears that name, they first think of the acronym for which it stood. Finally, I got my own supermarket. Praise the Lord. They also think of the supermarket that stood at 1511 Jefferson Avenue for a short time in the early 1980s. But most of all, FIGMOS was a representation of Black business ownership and empowerment. In addition to FIGMOS, there was another Black supermarket, which was just as prominent a decade earlier in the early 1970s. That was the Tops Market, which stood in the middle of the Town Gardens Plaza. That is also a part of this presentation, and we will start there first. July 25th, 1972 was the date the Tops Friendly Market franchise opened its location in the Town Gardens Plaza to the black community. The $700,000 venture was headed by Carl Mackin. Also involved in spearheading this effort were James Quarles, James Brooks, and the Black Business Development Foundation. Putting up the capital were four organizations: the Coalition for Capital Corp., Niagara Frontier Service, the Small Business Administration, and Marine Midland Bank.
Mr. Castellani, why would you invest money in this area when other people are moving away?
I don't agree with you. Other people are moving away. Right around the neighborhood, there's hundreds of new apartments. There's growth in this area. This area is not moving away, it's moving in.
Well, speaking for Marine Midland, I think we can say that we've always been interested in redevelopment in terms of our own market, in terms of the city, the county. We think the inner city offers us a chance for an investment, profitable investment, just as any other area. We started out 4 years ago with a very optimistic program to help redevelop the inner city by investing in minority businesses. And this is the crowning achievement of that effort, I think, this afternoon.
Manager Carl Mackin states on that day, "Now, we black people here in Buffalo can really be proud. We all live in the community, and we expect to be supported by the community. I know from my own experience that if you give a black person a good service, good products, and fair prices, they will support you. The days of gouging and ripping off dollars to take to the suburbs are over." At that time, the Town Gardens location was regarded as the largest black-owned and operated supermarket, not just in Western New York, but in the country, operating on a budget of $300,000. In addition to full-time staff, its part-time staff consisted of youth who worked after school, and the department heads were black. Among those overseeing the Tops operation with Mackin was a young man who had the distinction of being the first black supervisor at Niagara Frontier Service, which supervised Tops as well as other supermarkets in the area. That young man's name was Douglas Goggins Jr. Goggins had always dreamed of owning his own supermarket from the time he was first hired as a part-time clerk for the A&P at the age of 16. From there, he would build his career in the supermarket industry by assuming many roles as the first black in the dairy and produce departments, as well as store manager, community relations, and assistant personnel director throughout the Western New York area. It wasn't until after serving his stint at Niagara Frontier Service that he finally decided to pursue his dream of entrepreneurship. His journey to become an entrepreneur would not be an easy one, as he was turned down for a loan by two banks. The third time was the charm, however, as his proposal for financing was accepted by M&T Bank under the SBA Loan Guarantee Program. And on June 15, 1981, FIGMOS PTL officially opened to the Buffalo community. In an interview with the Buffalo Challenger, Goggins stated, "People in the community are in great need of a supermarket within their reach. The community is crying for someone to care. I care now, and with the help of God, I can realize the dream to service my people and give the community a supermarket that services and cares for the people. My dream has finally come true."
It was a proud day for Buffalo and Buffalo's black community when owner and operator Douglas Goggins recently opened the doors of his FIGMOS supermarket at 1511 Jefferson Avenue. It also marked a triumphant return of a professional in the food marketing field to the neighborhood he grew up in and the very building in which he once worked as a 16-year-old grocery clerk.
Well, I worked here when it was an A&P or when I was around 16 years old. And I always liked this store. As a matter of fact, let me go back a little further. I'm from a large family. all right? And then, being from a large family, it's food is always rationed. And if you didn't get there when Mom called, you can forget it. Somebody else got my grits. And I love food. You can tell how big I am, that I love to eat. And then I love people. And that's the name of the game. If you like people, you can make a success out of any business because they're going to support your business. But merchandising techniques and communicating with customers on an everyday basis, I love it. And this is why I struggle so hard to get this supermarket and to bring the change in the community. Because when I first started in this store, the clientele was altogether different, all right, and I like that. And plus, I grew up down the street, so I know 90% of the people. But being here in this store right here, being close to home, and knowing all the people, my dream was to own this store one day. So believe me, I fought for 18 years to get here, and I am very happy. Because now that this can be a training center for future stores in our own community. And if our community is going to grow, we black businessmen going to have to make it grow. And I am happy with the progress. I see since I've been here, the community is being cleaned up, which I love it. And the customers are coming in greeting me with a smile. I've got so many kisses from the customers that I said to myself yesterday and also this morning that I'm going to start selling those bad boys.
After 27 years of experience in the food marketing industry, from sweeping floors to executive and personnel management, Mr. Goggins developed the needed support from customers to corporations.
Then I found some more people that really wanted to work with me, which was Peter J. Smith, and believe me, they really treated me like I was a king. The merchandising techniques, they helped me out there. Even with bank financing, along with the M&T banks was wonderful to me. They have assisted me. I had so many people assisting me right now. I don't see where I can go wrong. If I do everything right at store level, I'm bound to make it. And I've got beautiful people. And these people are trained by me. And my meat manager, he's got about 40 years experience in this business. I got a produce manager with 20 years experience. All right, and there's about total store. There's about 225 years of experience. So we've got to make it survive, and we're going to make it survive. And this is what's so happy. We're not a bunch of rinky-dinks, so to speak, in this business. We know what we're doing. We are competitive. Our price structure is right, and the store is nice and clean. Nowhere in the world are we going to sell inferior merchandise. The customer gets something's not right, she's to bring it back, and we're going to take care of her. And she's not going to get anything that's not right because we're going to COD, circulate, observe, and delegate.
Okay. Hey, how did you come about that name of your store?
That's what I wanted to tell you. FIGMOS PTL. And it's a controversy name. Everybody's talking about what in the world is a FIGMOS. We come out on the air and say FIGMOS is coming. Well, I had such a hard time and for a year and a half fighting to get here that I decided I would name it FIGMOS PTL. Now, you know what it stands for. Finally, I got my own supermarket. Praise the Lord.
Great.
1 year later, on a Sunday afternoon, on October 17th, 1982, during a FIGMOS Unity Day event inside the Client Hands Music Hall, Goggins delivered shocking news to the community that the supermarket, which he had dreamed of owning and had labored and prepared himself for over 25 years, was in danger of closing. The Unity Day event itself was regarded as one of the most significant gatherings of Black Buffalonians within that year. The event recognized 50 different businesses in the community and featured performances from the African Cultural Center and Unity Day Choir. Goggins would then take the stage and deliver the shocking news. He stated, quote, "It's a shame to see 125,000 Black people and our Black businesses are struggling to survive. It's a shame that we go to our competitors and support them and down our own people." Unquote. A day later, 100 residents showed support as they showed up to the offices of his supplier, Peter J. Schmidt, as he met with the executives in an effort to save his supermarket. In an interview with the Buffalo Challenger in April of 1983, Goggins states that there were 3 factors leading up to the supermarket's impending demise. One was a lack of support from the community, which greatly affected his projection of making $70,000 a week, which actually only amounted to $35,000 a week in sales. There was competition from a Bell's supermarket, which had opened not too far away. Also, there was a failed experimental merchandising project, which offered products that did not sell in the black community, which resulted in a loss of $100,000 in the first year of business. The final factor was repaying $50,000 in loans to private individuals who helped open the supermarket. As the loans were being paid, they were also in violation of the agreement with the bank and SBA, which required a 5 to 6 year wait after the duration of the loans before paying off personal financiers. Matters would get worse after $50,000 in checks written against his account by his supplier would bounce. The bank then froze his account because they thought he was going to close and attempted to serve foreclosure papers, but later backed off. He would refuse several offers to walk away from his business. He states, "I was current with all my payments to M&T Bank and Peter J. Schmidt. I was just having problems with cash flow. It's not fair what they did to me because I made my commitment and paid back the $50,000. I told them if I lost everything, I would not walk away. I've got everything to lose, yet everything to gain. We're fighting to survive. They've never seen a person fight back like me." Stepping up to the plate to help was Joseph L. Easley, who would formulate the Save FIGMOS PTL Committee, a citywide drive to raise $100,000 to help stock up the shelves in the supermarket. The committee distributed some 200 plastic jars in churches, community centers, and businesses throughout the area. Among the contributors would be none other than Rick James himself, who donated $10,000 to the cause, which would also help to feed 300 needy families. Eventually, FIGMOS PTL would close its doors. However, when one looks at the story of FIGMOS, they should see a story of a man who was determined to follow his dream of owning his own business, staying steadfast despite the pitfalls that come with running a business. Support from one's community is also very important. Both the Town Gardens Tops and FIGMOS are no longer with us, but they are 2 profound stories of black business and empowerment in the city of Buffalo.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Like I said, for me, it's a learning experience. There's so much that you've given us in such a brief documentary. And one of the things I wanted to ask you was, how you came to create the Buffalo History Channel and how you see that work.
Well, the Buffalo History Channel basically came about during the pandemic. It really actually at the start of it. To go back further, I started off by doing a documentary back in 1997 on the history of the Build organization. Mm-hmm. And throughout my research, and I was able to come across a lot of information, and I also was able to go up to Canisius College. I was tipped off that there was a lot of film footage from some of the television stations. Incidentally, I was working at the TV stations, and that's pretty much where they had sent me. And I wound up finding a lot of information on Build as well as other aspects of the community. So after putting that together in the 90s, and I always looked around at all the material, kind of knew there were many stories. I knew then that there were many other stories to be told other than Bill, but that being the late 90s and technology had not having advanced at that point, wasn't sure how I would do it. So I remember gathering a lot of material from there. And fast forward to how the Buffalo History Channel started. It was right at the beginning of the pandemic. I had just recently relocated to Maryland. And I did a screening up at Buffalo State University of another one of my pieces. And that was the last event right before the shutdown. So as I was driving back to Maryland, I happened to be home, I gathered up a lot of my material, a lot of my videos and everything. And since I knew I was probably not going to be doing much other than being at home and going to work, because I worked at the post office, I would spend a lot of time taking a lot of my work and uploading it to YouTube. And thinking of a name of it, I called it the Buffalo History Channel without really giving any real thought to it. Just something that I called it just to have a lot of my work there, and use it as a networking tool. So when I would meet people in DC or in Baltimore or anything, they want to see my work, I can just send them right there to my channel and they can just see my work. And after uploading a lot of my work, I noticed that I was getting a lot of attention. And so I figure I'll build on it. And I've always wanted to expand on telling a lot more Buffalo stories. And just took all the materials that I had, put it together, and just started churning out stories, learned how to use Zoom, and did some because everybody was pretty much inside, and everybody was pretty much doing Zoom and doing podcasting and everything. So that's pretty much how the Buffalo History Channel came about. And in the midst of that, in the fall of 2020, I did a story. I wanted to also chronicle the legacy of Jefferson Avenue and businesses on Jefferson. So I did a story on the Apollo, as it existed when it was a movie theater. And after doing that, and then having the Moss brothers reach out to me and doing an interview with them, I started thinking to myself, I should do another one, because I did it in a line of original productions. And as it said up there, Buffalo History Channel original production. So I wanted to create something like that. And okay, what's the next original production? Looking for a unique story, a story that hadn't really been told, something that you might have known about, but you never really heard it told, at least in this fashion. And the idea of FIGMOS came up. And okay, finally I got my own supermarket, praise the Lord. I remember hearing about it as a child, and and I remember, the biggest thing is my grandparents used to shop there. And I would go there. I was about 9 or 10 years old when it opened, and I can remember going up and down those aisles and everything. So okay, and I knew that it wasn't around very long. So I figured, that'd be an interesting story to tell.
Yeah.
So when I came back to Buffalo on a visit, I went up to the library and did some research in the library. Went through some of the Challenger articles. I want to give a shout out to Alnisa Banks and Leah, because they had a lot of those articles housed at the library, and found a wealth of information. And one of the biggest things, when I was researching it, I discovered that there was a connection to the Tops market that was in the Town Gardens Plaza. And he was one of the overseers of the top of that Tops. I just thought to myself, wow, this is really, really interesting. This is a really strong connection here. And I read his story, and this is a good piece to do. So wound up doing it, and got a lot of attention online. Did another story on another smaller supermarket called the Dewdrop Supermarket later that year. Then fast forward, of course, into 2022, 5/14 happened. And after all that, not so much in the aftermath of the tragedy, but once there became a lot of talk about food deserts and the need for more Black-owned supermarkets. That's when the FIGMOS piece began to get more attention. And also, I had some footage. There was some footage that I had shot back in 2003 when they had cut the ribbon for the Tops Market that got a lot of attention as well. So that's pretty much how a lot of traffic came to those supermarket stories on the Buffalo History Channel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's amazing to me. I think obviously 514 brought a lot of raw conversations to our community. And one of the ways that I had put it, I said that I felt like it was, an acute tragedy, but that laid bare chronic problems, right? And so one of the things that I have felt really grateful for your scholarship and your documentaries is this storytelling that doesn't feel that it's been told as widely and as broadly. Again, you mentioned the Challenger, and Alnisa and Leah are great advocates for the Black community, but what the community lost in FIGMOS, it lost along Jefferson Avenue, right? And if we see FIGMOS closing in 1983 and not another ribbon cutting until 2003, right? We see a disinvestment that is pervasive in the city, and I think that some of that that sort of structural racism that we see made its way into Julia's paintings as well, and it was one of those things that Julia and I didn't know about FIGMOS before your documentary, and I really, when I say that I think that these kind of cross-cultural exchanges are really important, I mean it, because without you making that choice, telling that story, especially in a city as segregated as Buffalo, sometimes those stories get sequestered.
They do.
And I feel that by you putting it online, telling Black stories is helpful to somebody like me, where I can go and I can hear those stories and see them and feel that there are additional ways for those stories to be told. For those of you who haven't been downstairs into the before and after, again, exhibition, it features 22 paintings by Julia, in addition to some prose by Tiffany Gaines and poetry by Jillian Hainsworth. But there are a couple paintings that featured information that Julia got from Doug. So maybe you can talk a little bit about how you met and how that work made its way into your compositions.
Well, Doug and I initially met on the Freedom Wall, if I remember
Yes.
correctly.
Really?
So
Yes.
way back, yeah,
Oh,
because
yes.
you came to do an interview for that. So,
Yep.
and I remembered, of course, just your research, and I hadn't seen this documentary, obviously, at the time, but I remembered that you were a great wealth of knowledge. So when I started working on this particular series, initially it was just going to be figurative work. So there was no intention of still life work. I got halfway through and I got angry. I was just really, really upset thinking about, again, just this idea of people coming into the space and looking at maybe beautiful portraits, but not thinking about the systemic issues and, the fact that there is food scarcity there, and there are all these problems that have led up to what happened. And so I felt like I needed to research and include some element that was more addressing that. And that's where the still lifes really came into place. But I am so incredibly grateful to Doug's research, because one thing I noticed was in the mainstream sort of media, I wasn't finding any sort of research on the history of Jefferson Avenue. And I came across your documentary on FIGMOS, and you were gracious enough to share more resources with me. But I just thought that was really important, and I was stunned, frankly, that for all the news stations interviewing and talking about Jefferson, there wasn't this conversation about FIGMOS. And I think that really matters, that we don't lose that history. To me, it's a scaffold, right? The achievement of having Black ownership and having this incredible thing that happened to the community, having that lost, if the generation can see that, they can know it's attainable. I can reach for that and I can do that as well. And I think we can't let that history be buried and, disappear. So your research really gave me something to work with and kind of just inspired me to really think about those factors and to incorporate them in.
Oh, that's fantastic. I didn't know you guys met on the Freedom Wall.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
way back.
I did a piece on it. It's It's on the Buffalo History Channel.
There we go. All right, I got to do more research.
And did,
Learning something.
I think I got interviews with Julie. I don't think we had Chuck on there, but we did her, Julia and Idris, and we did a lot of the coverage down there.
Yeah.
And John Baker.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting to me. Again, these stories I'm thankful to both of you that this is something that you want to share, right? I know, Tiffany's in the audience tonight, and she's working on, an exhibition, that'll feature Wilhelmina Godfrey, and she's working with, other artists in the region that are not currently represented in this collection. And so I think it's important for us to continue to tell those stories. And, because, I didn't know John Baker when I started the Freedom Wall Project, right? And now that relationship has become something very dear to me and something that, every time I talk to John, I learn more and more about it. So, in addition to, FIGMOS and Build, are there stories that have resonated with you that you feel like we ought to, be sharing?
Wow, there's almost 300 stories on that channel.
Yeah,
right now.
I know.
I have to remind myself of it. Many of them actually resonate with me. It's hard for me to pick just one. I think the one origin point of it I think the thing that resonates and is the closest to home for me on a personal level was Juneteenth.
Yeah.
That actually was the first initial Jefferson Avenue story that I actually told, and it was contained within the Build documentary series. Because it was when it started on Jefferson Avenue, my father was part of the original committee with Bill Gator and a host of other individuals. And when I researched it and when I spoke to a lot of the Build members, they told me that the actual intent of the festival was not so much to have a festival, but it was to encourage and bring back the spirit of Black entrepreneurship to Jefferson Avenue and restore it to the Black Wall Street status that it once at one time used to be.
Yeah. What is it? So again, I'm not from Buffalo originally. I consider this my home, truly, but I have a lot to learn about this space. And I feel, what is it that, I guess I don't know how to phrase it, like what is it that we've lost? Because when I look at those pictures of Mr. Goggins in 1981, that feels like a place I want to go. And it feels like it was obviously a place that was beloved. But there are these structural elements that show up in your work, And some of them, when you talk about getting mad, I mean, the having to fundraise to save the store, not just shopping there, but to fundraise for it.
One of the things that really stood out to me in researching a lot of these stories, particularly within putting the Buffalo History Channel together, there seemed to be a spirit, an energy within the community amongst people that were really, it seemed to be a real active time. Everybody was just into doing something, into doing whatever in the community. They were starting a business, having an organization. I can remember on the Buffalo History Channel, one example is interviewing about doing a story on the Black Dance Workshop, having Frances Hare and Gail Wells and Yvonne James Brown on, and just listening to those ladies. I remember I did that interview with them, and you do an interview and where you ask questions. That was one of the few interviews I didn't even have to ask any questions. I just sat there and just let them just go. And we went on for those ladies went on for 1 hour and 45 minutes.
Yeah.
And the three of them had my full attention of everything that they were doing. Then they sent me this wealth of materials. But I'm thinking I'm just doing a basic story on a dance group in Buffalo, and then to understand that that was the Center for Positive Thought over there on East Utica, and that they had that museum. That was the biggest thing that stood out to me, because we used to go there when I was a child. We used to go there for field trips and go through that Museum of African and African American art. So it was really an amazing and compelling story, and they had connections to Juneteenth. They had connections to the Build organization and with connections with Rick James and all the things that were going on in the community. A lot of people were creating things, and a lot of people, and Gail told me this herself, a lot of people were working together.
Yep.
That's the one thing that they always emphasized to me. I think that part of it is one of the things that's missing.
Yeah. That's interesting. You know, I think of Buffalo as a resilient city and a resilient community, but you know, working together takes sometimes more work than you'd like it to these days.
It can.
You know, and it's interesting though, when you mentioned Gail, you know, Gail is somebody that I've worked with since the Freedom Wall, and that we'll be working with in conjunction with our Before and After Again exhibition. We're sponsoring some artists in the audience tonight who will be working, doing some plein air painting with the East Side Garden Walk. So I think it's interesting that like what I appreciate about your storytelling and about your painting is that when I look at this, I can start to crack open that web. I can get the connectivity. If we start talking about FIGMOS, we can start talking about our current situation. If we start talking about Juneteenth, we can start talking about dance, right? There's a way for us to talk about the connectivity that we have through these cultural expressions, and I appreciate that, you know, the work that you both are doing are giving us a kind of different lens into those histories and those ways of storytelling. I don't know if you want to talk about, you know, a painting at all, but you know, this was a painting that really moved me. It's a hard. There are two paintings that you put in the slides that are tough for me to look at. This is one of them, right? There's a sort of bitterness to the previous piece, but this one has a literal bitterness, right?
Yeah.
It's just.
Well, I think for me with this piece, you know, obviously was thinking about that idea of bitterness as a metaphor and, you know, the loss of something, but also the idea of, you know, lemonade can be sweet if you try to make it. So I think so much of like what we need in Buffalo is Black ownership. And I say that just frankly, nobody's gonna love us like we love ourselves, you know, and I think having ownership of things is really important. So when I reached this point in the documentary, it really made me think back to my childhood, and maybe you guys will remember some of these places. Miss Alice's Fish Market, I hung out there all the time, or Andre DeAndre's hair salon, and you know, Shu Kelly's karate school. So those places, it meant something to me. I mean, to know that there was Black ownership and that there's an investment directly into the community matters. And I think that we don't, systemically, we're stripped often of the opportunity to have that. So I think even when we have it on a small scale, or even when we have it briefly, it's so powerful. And I think I really felt that when I was making this one, just thinking about how many entrepreneurs have the spirit, you know, they have the desire and the drive. And sometimes it's things like funding that makes it impossible, or sometimes it's things like redlining that makes it impossible to own the building that you want to work out of. So for me, that's really what I started thinking about with this particular piece.
So I feel like I've talked a lot about, so in every one of the still lives in the exhibition, you'll see, you know, these kind of stark backgrounds that Julie has presented, but there's always a red thread or a red line talking about that historic systemic redlining that has caused so much strife in, you know, many North American cities, but certainly Buffalo. And, you know, you talking about Black ownership and Mr. Goggins being an example of that and empowerment, it strikes me suddenly as, you know, one of the struggles that I have had as a public art producer on the East Side is Black ownership. I'm realizing, you know, that people have asked me, like, well, you know, can you do more on Jefferson Avenue? Can you do more in these places? And of course, we want to, we hope to. We're working to find those partnerships, but there are those moments where you go to a space or a location and it is not owned by a Black person. It is not owned locally, right? And so understanding the way in which those dominoes have fallen since the 80s, or the way in which, you know, I think that I am, you know, as an advocate and as an activist, still learning so much about what it means when we say systemic racism, what it means when we say redlining, and how deep and pervasive those elements are. And I think it is interesting, you know, the way that you've put your, you know, that one little red thread in your work, but that it, to my mind, it represents something so big.
Yeah. Well, it's very much a background element too, and I think that's the way it functions here in Buffalo. We don't forget about it, but I think it kind of just melts into the background of normal and every day. You know, it just kind of fades because we're so used to it collectively, I think.
I don't know if you have an answer to this, but I wonder how when I look at your work, especially about FIGMOS, but when I look at your work and I see these stories, I do feel like even though there's a distance between now and then, me and that location, that it is inspiring. It's a brief history, but I think that to me, it is something that, sort of as you said, I mean, it's proof of concept, right? We can have black ownership in a black city. Yeah. And we should, right? Absolutely. We should be demanding that.
Absolutely.
And I think that your work is helping to convince, a generation that maybe didn't have the opportunity to shop at a place like FIGMOS or to go to the Apollo in its first incarnations, right? To understand that these are not stories that are lost, but they're stories that frankly need to be revived, right?
Absolutely.
So how do you see your work playing a role in our collective kind of education in that? I mean, how can we carry forth in the most responsible way your storytelling? Because I think I'm grateful that you're doing this on YouTube, right? I'm grateful that this isn't a way that you can do it when you're not even in Buffalo right now, right? You can tell these Buffalo stories. For me, it's important because, we were speaking earlier with a gentleman in the audience about how, perhaps, black audiences are picking up the Challenger, but maybe white audiences aren't. Maybe white audiences are in the AKG where you can pick up the Challenger. Maybe they're not picking it up. What are our roles as an institution to help tell you those stories?
I think the stories, whenever I'm asked that question, I just say the stories should serve as examples that, we don't want to romanticize the past, but you want to use the past as an example. A lot of times oftentimes we hear there's nothing going on in Buffalo. But when you look back, they're at a time when people were still leaving Buffalo, but you had more going on back then. So it showed you examples of how people worked and came together to many times make ways out of no way. Mm-hmm. And you had far less resources then than you have today. But people, I always say use the past as an example and to just build off of.
Yeah, that's inspiring. I think, I'm curious, Julie, I don't know that I've talked to you too deeply about this image, but this is a painting in the exhibition that really got me. I do encourage you, obviously, to go check out the work in person. Julie is an astounding painter. And when I look at this, I see it for what it is. It's a still life. To my mind, it is hilarious that Julia said that she wasn't certain she could paint still lives because she was a portrait painter. And I thought, well, if you can paint hands, you can paint loaf of bread. But
I learned something new about myself.
But this painting in particular, there's something about it, and I don't know the word to use. The word that comes to mind is it's a little repulsive, right? The money, which to my mind, paper money, it has value because we project value on it, and it is how we exchange for goods. But it feels dirty. I certainly wouldn't want to put money in my mouth, right? And so I think symbolically you can see it obviously as the filling that might go in a sandwich, but here I see it literally. I feel like when I looked at it, I was like, oh man, the bread's ruined. Right? You ruined the bread. It's and you ruined it with a lot of money. I don't carry, I think maybe we talked about this, but I don't carry 50s. I don't have 50s in my wallet, right? That's not, I don't know. Talk to me a little bit about the choices that you made here, because it seems that, again, you're taking some of the documentary input that we're getting about these histories, and then you're making these really symbolic choices that allow us to kind of, like I said, kind of splinter out and see things differently. So.
Yeah. Well, I also don't carry 50s. I had to go to the bank for that. But it should be repulsive. I want it to make people look at it and like lose their appetite. This idea, because it is repulsive what it symbolizes, this idea of, all the power being held and who has the money locally. And, this idea of entrepreneurial spirit being crushed because of lack of funds, or just because of something. You may have the funds and you may not have the ability to get the store. It's so many factors, and I just think that disgusts me. And you see it permeate so many different aspects of Buffalo, whether it's real estate, education, ownership, all sorts of stuff. It's in everything, and I think that's part of the divide in Buffalo. It's not only racial, it's classist, extremely classist. So when I thought about this painting, it was that literal disgust that I had that I think is symbolized really well by the choice to make the money the filling in between the bread. And I think that on the note, I guess, of still lifes and just how I didn't think I could do it, I feel like I found a really powerful tool in doing still life pieces now, just based on the reaction people have had to it. I think it can say something maybe where, my portraiture, which I also love, can't necessarily say the same thing. So I liked that this could convey all of those really challenging and upsetting feelings that I was having where I couldn't do that with portraiture. So I'm glad to hear that it comes across as repulsive. It should. It's good.
All right, it's doing the right work.
Yeah.
I'm gonna, it's interesting hearing Julia talk about where her work has been and where it's going, how it's been influenced by you. What are the next stories that we can expect from you? What needs to be told that you haven't quite queued up for us yet?
Right now, I've been like on a break for the last couple of months. I just told Tony from Channel 7, one thing I'm going to be working on is putting together something for Juneteenth's 50th anniversary, which is right around the corner.
Yeah.
So just trying to figure out looking for some new Juneteenth stories, particularly, be it from the past, be it from the 70s, 80s, 90s, so trying to find a way to try to bring all the eras together. And one of the interesting things that I've been observing that on Facebook, I posted a few different Facebook reels, which have gotten a lot of attention. One of them in particular was from 1980, which was the very first one that they had in Martin Luther King Park and along Fillmore Avenue. And we put some footage in there of a carnival that they had in the wading pool. And I'm looking at the comments section, it's a lot of people that never knew that there was a carnival there. And everybody saying, bring back the carnival for the kids. And I do know, because I was talking with Charlie Fisher, I ran into him yesterday, and I was telling him about it, and he was saying that Bill was having some conflicts with that because they didn't want the festival to belong to a carnival, just to a carnival. They were kind of opposed to the carnival, even though that they had it. And I forgot what there was a whole story with it. I got to find the tape and interview him again about it. Yeah. But I do remember when I interviewed him for Bill, there was a whole controversy with that carnival. So when I was reading those comments, I kind of was laughing to myself about it, that it was, because a lot of people didn't know. Mm-hmm. And they just see that and they just want them to bring the carnival back.
Well, sure. I mean, the Juneteenth Festival here in Buffalo is a site of great celebration and great joy. So please, for people in the audience, and I know there are some who have some Juneteenth stories, tell this man, because
yes, please.
because I want to see them, I want to learn from them. I want to continue this conversation. We have a kind of a humble group here, so rather than take questions from the stage, I'm going to thank our guests this evening, and I think we'll join you here if you have any further questions for us. I want to say a sincere thank you to Doug, to the work that you do. You were doing it because you felt like these stories needed to be told. They obviously impacted another artist. They've impacted us. We've been able to then share that through the exhibition in a published book, point to the work online. I'm thrilled that Mr. Goggins was able to join us this evening.
Absolutely. Absolutely.